Idiot. So, welcome everybody. It is Rob Brown here. This is the 19th, believe it or not, in a series of panel discussions we've done around the accounting profession, particularly the accounting networks, the associations, the alliances, and we've got an esteemed panel of experts and influencers that speak into that world today. So I'm going to get our wonderful panelists to just introduce themselves in just a moment. And we are in unusual times. There is no doubt we've not had anything like this. COVID has turned the world upside down. The accountants have been described as the emergency services for business. They stand in that gap as superheroes with capes, trying to keep the economy going, but their world has turned upside down here. So we're going to speak into that a little bit, how what's happened has affected the profession, and particularly the networks, the associations, the alliances that serve those networks, because it's not a time for accounting firms to be on their own and be isolated. So belonging to something and collaborating, there's a lot to be said for that. So I've got some old friends and new one with us today, all serve the accounting profession in their own way. And I'm going to start with the legend that is Paul Richmond. Just ask Paul to introduce himself from the Grow Group, and then we'll go on to Robert, James, Claire, and then William. Paul, welcome.
Thanks very much, Rob. Okay, my name is Paul Richmond. I'm Managing Director of the Grow Group. We are a consulting firm really focused on change, and we work with a broad range of professional services firms. So predominantly it's accountants, but we also service lawyers as well, perish the thought, effectively helping them execute on strategy. And very often that means aligning their people. And more often than not, that means looking at change, usually changing behaviors, changing ways of working. So we run quite a lot of leadership programs for partners and people who are aspiring to be partners, and also focusing on those technical advisors who need to transition into that more business advisory role.
Super. Well, that's all we've got time for. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. That's been fantastic.
That's within 60 seconds. What do you say?
You did a great job. You did a great job. James Hickey, I'm actually going to come to you next. So a quick introduction.
Perfect. Right, Rob, thank you very much. James Hickey, founder, director of Business Vision Consulting. 20 years, I know I don't look old enough, but 20 years of leading professional service networks, most recently PKF International. Now taking on the world on my own with a few friends on the side, and very much looking to challenge the way that professional service firms think. Never has it been more important for them to have a very clear message in the marketplace and really look at the values that they work to in supporting their clients. And as you rightly said, Rob, there's never been a more important time for the professional services marketplace. They are seen as the firefighters. I think a lot of them really haven't shifted as far as they could and should, and we'll be talking about that later on. But I think it's a really interesting time. I don't think there's been a better time to be the right firm in this marketplace.
Interesting. Thank you for that. Robert Salvoni, welcome. A little introduction from you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Robert Salvoni recently joined the board of MyWorkPapers about 6 months ago. Rich Neal, who many of you I'm sure will know, got me out of semi-retirement, I guess. I spent the last 8 to 10 years since leaving Iris, where I was MD a long time ago, investing in being a non-exec director and chairing a number of software businesses. But it's a joy to be back in the accounting world again, and obviously delighted to be on the board and part of the growth strategy that is MyWorkPapers. Of course, those who know MyWorkPapers, we're knocking on the door of about 1,000 customers now, helping accountancy practices both in Australia and here in the UK and also elsewhere to deliver and manage their work papers through the cloud.
And you speak into the accounting networks a little bit too, Robert, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work very closely with 2020, recently signed up with Charter Group and a number of others. So yeah, very, very active in the networks.
Thank you. Claire, great to have you with us. Welcome. A quick intro from you.
Hi Rob, so I'm Claire Bowley. I'm the Managing Director of Dynamic Events. We are a professional conference organiser, and we've been working with accountancy networks and other professional services networks for the last 15, 16 years. And now we're kind of moving out of live events for a short time, hopefully, and helping clients pivot to a virtual world.
Thank you very much. William, you know I'm coming to you, so you're going to unmute there. Well, welcome. A quick intro, please.
William Johnson, I'm the MD of the Openside Group. We have worked predominantly for the last 25 years training management consulting firms in cognitive and behavioral skills. And increasingly, we're starting to work with consultants and lawyers as they want to move into the trusted advisor, for want of a better word, arena. And I've spoken at a number of conferences, network conferences in the last 2 years, a couple for James and for a number of the other networks.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. And we're going to dip into a few little topics now. And James, I'm going to start with you because you have lived in the Accounting Network Association world. How do you feel the profession has coped as a race, if you like, with what's happened over the last few months?
I think a profession being the networks, but I think actually the profession covers both the firms they represent and the networks. And I think it's been all too often said that they've been pushed to make changes they really should have made years ago. And I think that now the challenge for the networks themselves is relevance. What does a firm really need, and what are the core offerings? As you said right at the beginning, at the heart of what networks have traditionally been since the day of their creation has been this around gatherings, and most networks have been very slow pre-COVID to actually go to this more dynamic, not using the term there, but dynamic online meetings and what have you. But I think one of the challenges that networks face is actually, and most of them, if not all of them, are some of the best kept business secrets in the marketplace. And so, what are they trying to do? Are they just trying to be forums for their members to refer to one another? Are they looking to actually be exposing into the client world and actually be there to be seen as a resource, an alternative to the big 4, 5, 6, those branded networks, those that if you go up to any entrepreneur and say, have you heard of a Grant Thornton? Have you heard of a Mazars? They can give you an answer. But I would say the vast majority, if not all of the networks, if you go and say, have you heard of this network? They will look at you blankly. So I think that the day of reckoning has come for networks. I think if you look at it, some are up to 50 years, 60 years in existence, but most of them have spent that time growing. And I think a lot of boards are sat there saying, what does tomorrow look like? What is the real value that we are now looking to take to the market? And ultimately, how do we go to market in terms of being that real environment for trusted advisors and to put them in front of those people that really are looking for trusted advisors?
Yeah. Claire, does James make a good point that networks right now are struggling for relevance? They're justifying membership fees. They're saying, how can we add value to our member firms? How do you feel they've coped?
Gosh, that's quite a big question for a conference organiser, actually, and I'm not sure I'm totally qualified to answer that. I think we see, obviously, the whole side of it from a conference and the face-to-face meeting perspective. I think James makes a good point in the sense that I feel that we need to have a good look at what we're doing. So we need to look at how we're adding value. If we're getting everybody face to face like this, albeit at the minute it's got to be virtual, but when we get back to live events, we'll be spending money, we'll be spending time, all of those things getting people into one place. So I think we as conference organisers and the networks themselves need to be thinking about what they're bringing into those events and how that actually has a relevance and how that is going to benefit delegates and benefit them in their working environment.
Sure. Paul, we can put lawyers, accountants, professional services into this bucket here. They don't smack of agility, do they? They don't pivot well. They thrive on certainty and data and everything else, and that's the opposite of what we've got right now. How have you seen them cope?
I think accountants have coped pretty well. because I think what they've done is they've said, right, we've got to focus on cash. We've got to look at our business. What do we know? And they've got some certainty, and the government have done a lot to help them with that. And they furloughed junior staff where necessary. And I think accountants have done a very good job. I've heard a lot of people saying, I've had some people to say, I think it's fantastic, this lockdown. I go out and now I can have 5 client meetings a day, where before I'd be lucky if I'd get 2. I mean, 2 would be a big day, 5-6 hours in the car, 2-hour meetings. And that was huge. Now I can have 6 meetings and I'm still in home in time for tea. I think the networks are struggling more for the reason, as Claire said, one network we work with have said, it's almost like you've lost your raison d'etre. What do we do now? We're not bringing people together. And they really are concerned. And we've suggested, moving some of it onto a virtual model. And that was it didn't compute. It's like, but the whole point is to get together. And it's like, well, the whole point is the speakers that you have at the events and the technical learning that they're picking up, or behavioral learning. And it's like, but the whole point is to get people together, because the network is a social environment to build trust, to help you transfer work across to people. And that's a more challenging thing to do in a virtual environment. So I think they found it really hard to adapt.
William, you coach networks to be behaviorally and cognitively better than they are. How have you seen the cope with what's going on?
Okay, so the risk of being controversial.
You go for it.
So my encounter with the networks came through doing keynotes, and I got a bit of a shock at the first keynote when I delivered to the conference. All seemed to go well, people were engaged. A guy came up to me at the end and said, "That was really unusual, I actually learned something." And I inquired then, as a psychologist by background, I sort of delicately inquired what they came to conferences for. And there were 4 things, and the 4th thing was to learn something. Very few of them came with, the 3rd thing was networking. And I'll leave it to your imagination what the other 2 things were. That fundamentally changed my approach to delivery. What I've noticed now, though, is that if you take away the social aspects of it, the things I've been doing for the networks more recently, facilitated webinars, facilitated conferences, there's much more engagement and much more interest in learning things. So in that sense, I wonder if when conferences come again, if they do come again, but when they come again, whether the balance now will change and people will expect more sort of learning rather than pure socializing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Robert, you've been patiently waiting there nodding at a few things. How is this resonating with you, and how are you seeing the networks cope with what's happening?
No, I'm nodding because I'm learning something. It's great being part of the panel, and thanks very much. But I think one of the things just to reflect on is that accountancy practices, I think, themselves have leveraged the technology in most cases very, very effectively. We've seen that. The secret now is for the networks to do the same. And if their only raison d'etre, exactly as William was saying, was to get people together for networking, then why not use the technology to be doing that? Not just through Zoom calls, but really value-adding things that they can start to do. Really looking at best practice across their network, looking at benchmarking. For example, what do individual practices charge for a particular type of audit? Wouldn't it be great if they benchmarked within their group and outside of their group what best practice actually looks like? The danger is that when you're part of a network, instead of leveraging the great things about that, giving you scale, giving you branding, giving you that kind of kudos, you're actually leveraging the worst things about being part of a large organization. Slow decision making, hesitancy, and you're losing the nimbleness of being an individual practice. So for me, it's just really making sure that if you are part of a network, really leverage that network, get the learning from all of the other members of that network through that network that they can actually provide using the technology, doing the benchmarking. They can look at best practice in terms of technology utilization or approaches to the market. They can share those and everyone can learn. And there's nothing stopping them doing that through technology.
Let's talk about the way they've pivoted the networks. Claire, I'll start with you on this one, because you've probably seen the biggest pivot in moving from face-to-face events to online. But we know that they've responded well in the whole, but I hear stories around accounting firms and networks now getting stuff done in 3 weeks that they would have taken them years to get through all their strategy meetings and committees, but now they're kind of turning a little bit more on a dime. So what kind of things are they doing right now that's working for them, do you think?
Well, I think it's really interesting that, as you say, as everyone's been saying, just cutting out all of that time that's spent travelling means that you can actually have really effective meetings, and you can really get things done very quickly. I think what we're seeing a lot is that a lot of the accountancy networks are using Zoom, because obviously everybody had to react to this pretty quickly. They wanted to keep that connection going, and so that was kind of an obvious way to go. I think also there's a certain feeling around trying to use something that's familiar, and I think also trying to use something that's not very expensive. I think we're getting to a point where a lot of people are very zoomed out, not just in the networks, but I think generally, you know, a lot of people are finding that it's just getting a bit overwhelming. And I think probably now is the time when some of the networks should be looking at using more of a professional platform that doesn't just enable you to deliver content. It also means that you can make use of some of those connections. So, you know, we always talk here about the 3 sort of pillars of a conference being content, connection, and community. And I think that's really where this should start to be going, so that instead of using something very basic like Teams or Zoom, you know, you're starting to leverage the ability to keep your community connected, because that just seems to be such an important part of being associated with these networks.
Could I jump in on that one?
Go ahead, Robert.
Only because I'd just like to challenge the comment there about something basic like Teams. Now, you know, I don't sell Microsoft Teams. It's not part of our portfolio. We do integrate with it, but actually, we've actually utilized it ourselves to an incredible level of depth. If you actually start looking at some of the tools that are available within it in terms of planning tools, not just communications tools.
So this is an alternative to Zoom, Robert, right?
It's not at all, really. I mean, there's one tiny aspect of Microsoft Teams which enables you to do video and audio conferencing. That's a tiny aspect of it. What it does, and again, I'm not a salesperson for Microsoft, and I acknowledge many of the shortcomings of it. But one of the great things that these tools actually allow practices to do and networks to do is to collaborate in ways that are way beyond you know, just through meetings. You can access your, as I say, a Microsoft Planner, which is a fantastic set of tools that enables you to structure all of your processes, and you know, for people to work collaboratively on single documents rather than having to email and share and you know, get version control and so on all wrong. So I think, you know, with all of these things, so much learning has been gained, so much technology is out there, and yet we use so little of it. It isn't the invention of the technology, it's the application of the technology that's the real breakthrough. We've had mobile phones, PCs, and the internet, well, certainly for the last 20, 25 years. And yet how little of those things do we actually use? And sometimes it takes something like, unfortunately, tragically, a global pandemic for us to actually start to wake up and realize how rich that technology is and how we can use it to very, very good effect.
Yeah, Robert makes a good point, Paul, doesn't it, about the tech being an enabler? You were nodding there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, I mean, I'm a pretty much dyed-in-the-wool Microsoft hater. I loathe it. I loathe everything about it. I'm a sort of Mac lover. And one of my colleagues who runs our project management, of course, very, very pro Microsoft, because it's ubiquitous. Everyone has got it. And we started using Teams, and as Robert says, it's a very good platform. And Teams, as my colleague said, he said it's not there to compete with Zoom. It's there to get you working collaboratively on documents with a very small group of people, you know, 5 or 6 people. And that's why Teams only has half a dozen cameras on at one time, which apparently they're changing
Oh, there's a lot more now, but that's changed in the last couple of weeks.
It's the last couple of weeks. I know they said it was coming in the fall and it was going to be up to 49. But
let's not make this a tech discussion.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Once we get into the tech. And I think Teams is fantastic because, as Robert says, version control, you don't have to worry. You can load all your documents up there. And so I'm a convert. And I think it's really good and it's really helping us work. And I know that what clients are doing are saying, yeah, we've kind of got Microsoft Outlook and we don't use anything else. And now that we could use Teams and we're all remote, everybody's signing on and finding it has been a real boon. And I think that, exactly as you say, we've had all this technology for years, but we don't kind of use it. You only use what you know, and professionals are very good for just dipping in and using what they know. And you're almost blind to everything else. And now, of course, we really need a bit of help and support because we're remote working.
I'm going to give the last word to James on this, but William, quickly, behaviorally, accountants, they're technically brilliant, but are they technologically brilliant? Are we asking them to be geeks, or is Zoom sufficient for them to just get on video? Because we wouldn't see an accountant on video for the last few years, would we?
I think Paul's right that generally we all just use the stuff we need to use. And we've probably all got 20 apps on our phones that we've never looked at, even if we've paid for them. They look good, you know, fitness app, diet app, spelling app, translation. We dip in and it's a sort of standard human behavior, really. You pick what's useful.
Yeah.
And I think also, I wouldn't underestimate the time it takes to master some of these things. So we've spent a lot of hours rehearsing stuff, delivering seminars, training programs over Zoom. And we had in our rehearsals, we had some catastrophes because some of the simple stuff is straightforward. But when you want to get into the other functions like annotate, breakout rooms, cross collaboration, you do need to master it, and it takes practice.
James, last word for you on this, on what do you think they're doing right now to up their game?
Look, I think two things here. Just finally, sort of closing on the technology thing. I think particularly accountants love their technology, and you can see that when you go to Accountex, or when you go to any conference. The expo is just full of techie companies, and it's like children in sweet shops, and they will literally grab anything they think. And I think the challenge for accounting, professional service firms in general, is the strategy behind it, making sure that everything talks to one another, that it's not, and I've seen too many organizations where they've literally got spreadsheets and data hubs and none of them talk to each other, and it's an utter disaster. So I think that's going to be, I think, an interesting thing in the coming weeks and months, where people have done that jump into it, and now it's really understanding whether it's truly strategic. I think going back to maybe the initial question on meetings and conferences, I actually think this is trying to pull a positive. What this is allowing is for networks to get into their member firms. Historically, it's only the lucky few that go to the conferences. And what by bringing everything online, and I don't think they're doing it right, but they'll get there. What it has allowed is that more people within firms can actually get to experience what it means to be part of that network. So that is a huge opportunity for networks, because if you really drill down, lots of networks saying we've got 5,000, 10,000, 18,000. At most, they've probably got 25%, and I'm being very generous. I reckon probably 10% of that staff count actually could give you any sort of explanation of what that relationship means to be part of that network.
Great stuff. Robert, how are accounting networks getting things wrong, and how are you supporting them? And I don't want to seem unfair to them, because they're doing a great job on the whole, but where do you see them perhaps falling a little bit short, and how are you stepping in to support them?
Okay, so I think that a lot of the conversation we've just had in the last session was around technology, and I'll try and avoid it if I can, but as the nominated technologist on the panel, I do find it a little hard.
But there's a strategic element behind the tech, isn't it, as being pointed out?
Very, very much so. I think it's absolutely essential. And I used an analogy the other day, which has kind of stuck with me. And I asked someone, I said, listen, when was the last time you bought an umbrella? What was the weather like when you bought that umbrella? Because I could pretty much guarantee, unless it was a giveaway at a conference, it was probably raining. It certainly wasn't sunny. And right now, it's raining. You know, the challenges that we're facing in the profession are material. Yeah, it's incredibly hard for us to collaborate with our colleagues who, you know, are distant. They're in different places. It's very hard for us to communicate with our customers. It's very hard for us to stay on top of, you know, quality issues and to keep ahead of deadlines they're constantly looming. Because guess what, HMRC and Companies House and so on, they've been kind in many ways, but they're not overly generous in terms of you know, giving us leeway. And so, you know, what you have to do is you have to say, well, you know, these are the challenges that the profession's facing. The solutions are out there. They have been for years. And yet we've always constantly putting off and saying, actually, do you know what? We're fine as we are at the moment. We're fine all coming into the office and having all those meetings. And it's great having all of my colleagues around me and being able to pop out and see my clients and, you know, use Excel and PDF and all these wonderful things that we've kind of got used to. Yeah, absolutely. We recognize that cloud stuff probably for those geeky young firms is the right thing, but you know, we're fine without. And then suddenly the heavens open. In fact, there's a siren going past at the moment. The heavens open, and suddenly you can't operate in those ways anymore. And so, yeah, MyWorkPapers, you know, I'm sorry to say in many ways that it's taken COVID-19. We've had the 5 best sales months the business has ever had, and every month over the last 5 months, it's you know, massively increased in terms of take up. We've had to hire people left, right, and centre. You know, and in order to support you know, our increasing customer base, and that, you know, that's great for MyWorkPapers, but actually it's a sad reflection that, you know, we've known all along that this is stuff we needed to do, and it's only now when we really need it. So in terms of the networks, back to your question, you know, the networks really should be thinking about the future more, should be thinking about what the best practice and ways of working need to be for the future. The old situation where a small local practice only recruited from within you know, commuting distance and only dealt with customers that were within, you know, 10 miles of their office. Those days are gone now. You know, you can have clients from anywhere in the UK. You can recruit from anywhere, and you can work with people in Mumbai, in the Philippines, in the US, in wherever it happens to be. The joy now of using cloud-based tools, and again, I'm not just talking about MyWorkPapers. You know, there's plenty out there, and they involve communications and various other things as well. Using cloud-based tools completely changes the model. And I think it's incumbent on the networks to really do a little bit more crystal ball gazing and start to you know, to benchmark what best practice is, hold it up, and be quite evangelical about what the accountancy practice of the future needs to look like.
We're going to finish by talking about the future in a moment. William, where do you feel the accounting networks are in pain, and how are you supporting them?
Well, the first conferences that we ran, they were all concerned with damage limitation. So that was with cash flow, debt recovery, that sort of thing. But post that, I think they started to realize that it was even more important now to develop the emotional intelligence aspects of client conversations.
Right.
Previously, it became apparent to them that it was no good just having content subject conversations with the client. They had to have a wider, broader conversation involving personality aspects, personal aspects, emotional aspects, and they couldn't have the technical conversation, if you like, without having that type of conversation first. And where they might have been able to get away with that in a face-to-face meeting, it becomes much more apparent if you're in a virtual meeting, where the differentiator is your ability to make that connection.
Yeah. It is about people, James, isn't it? And accounting networks have an opportunity here, but where do you feel they need help, and how might you be supporting them?
I think, and this is something that I've been trying to instill wherever I've gone, it's just a complete and utter change of mindset and how they run themselves. They are still run as golf clubs, not businesses. They are membership organizations. When you really drill down and look at board structures, a lot of them are actually not in a position due to conflict of interest in terms of whether they're making a decision on a firm level or a network level. So, I think that what we're looking at is, there are some great networks out there. There's no denying it. There are also a lot of networks out there that have really been thriving on the good times. And, they've been thriving on firms believing they need to be part of a network. They've been thriving on growing economies. And now is the time where people are really going to question why they are spending 5, 10, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to be part of this. And I think a lot of networks are going to become unstuck by the way they are owned and managed. And I think that it's only going to be the few that really get this. And I think that to talk now about how successful they've been is far too early. We've just gone through chapter 1 of this journey. You're looking at, the government's already, and the scientists are talking that just in the UK, within the next 12 to 18 months, potentially the COVID-related deaths are going to be hitting 120,000. So we're hitting 45 at the moment. We're entering a period of multiple lockdowns. That's going to come. If people are now beginning to think we made it, they're going to get really stuck.
Yeah, we'll come back to the future certainly. Paul RIchmond, what's making accounting networks pick up the phone and say, "Quick, get Paul RIchmond on the phone. We need the Grow Group in here right now."
I was going to say, after that sort of optimistic note from James, I mean, you do sell it really darkly. And the only challenge, I suppose, is, or the thing that goes through my mind is that I think you're absolutely right. I mean, absolutely. What I've heard, and I've heard a few people who are advising government, and it's a multiple lockdown strategy. And then Bojo comes out the other day and says, we're definitely not locking down, and I'm thinking, I think you might be, certainly we'll have another Leicester again. So,
sorry, can I just quickly say though, and I'm being hugely negative, but also I'm sitting here going, there is so much opportunity, and it's all about mindset, and it's a time for real leaders, not followers. And and I think that the network that gets it, well, they are just going to go on a journey, and it'll be something to be part of. And I only wish I was still part of the network world. I'm not anymore at the moment. But I don't think it's been a better time to be at leading a network. But you've got to have the board behind you that is going to look at it commercially.
I was surprised. Sorry, because we were talking to a network, and I said to them recently, before COVID struck, I said, "What's your 3-year strategy?" Because we were looking at development programs at manager and partner level. And Rob, you were just saying, what are the sort of pain points? And I was horrified when there was just this silence in the room. I thought, what's the strategy? At the moment, you're running one big program, exactly as James says. You got 100,000 members globally, and you do one partner program. Really? What's the aspiration? And silence, because they're not thinking strategically about what it means. And what's happened in lockdown is that you can then say, okay, forget all your international flights. Forget going into a fancy hotel. Forget the first 2 reasons, as William said, that you go to these things. You won't be doing that from home with the kids. But what you can do is you can have a virtual environment where you maybe have hour and a half, couple of hours, but staged over a few weeks.
Yeah.
And now we can have something where people can do the learning and do 6-8 hours chargeable a day. But that's integrated with their work, and that's a fabulous opportunity. And of course the cost is a fraction, because putting on these big events, you have a lot of sunk cost in event catering, all the hotels and the flights. And finally, when you get there, you probably spent 90% of the money to think about, can we afford to have William to come in and talk to us? And they go, well, maybe, just about. And you think, actually now we can say, forget the event, we can invest in some really great content, and we can spread it out so it's accessible for a much wider audience.
Yeah. Well, Claire, Paul's teed you up really nicely there, hasn't he? Because he's talking about the events. But what kind of conversations are you having with accounting networks right now, and how are they leaning into you?
Well, I'm always going to be banging the drum for live events, because I really think that at the end of the day, that face-to-face, that human interaction is so important. And yeah, I agree. We do have to make sure that it's much more relevant, content's more relevant, and people are really getting value out of it. I do, however, think there's such a place for people going to the bar at the end of the day, making those connections and building those bonds of trust, and you just don't get that so easily without that face-to-face connection. Having said which, I think what we're going to see is probably a slow return to live events, but they're going to be hybrid. And actually, I think that's probably where it's going to be now for probably ever. Because, as a lot of people have said, it gives so much more access into the network. So suddenly, instead of having, C-suite delegates who are all coming together, generally they know each other anyway very well. And there's a lot to be said for that, but it's getting all of those messages out to the rest of the network so that people really get what the network's about. And you can really, get some, young leaders, middle management, all of those people to really be part of that community. And I think that's the way it's going to go.
Yeah. Paul, you wanted to come in on that one with Claire.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to beat it out in the chat to send it over to you. But I was interested, Claire, because I think you're absolutely right about this thing for events being really key, because people do need that interpersonal connection and they want that face-to-face thing.
And it's the biggest part of the value proposition, isn't it, for accounting networks, as William was hinting, and bringing people together because they want to think, what are you doing? What are you doing? How can I learn from you?
Yeah. And I just remember an event that I did years ago for SIPFA, and they said, we want to put on a 2.5 day event. And I'm thinking, okay, you're going to hammer them with slides all day long and then they're going to go to the bar. And they said, no, we don't do it like that. No, we start early in the morning at 8 o'clock, we work till lunchtime, and then we network. And the entire afternoon, they had a series of, it was phenomenally well done. They had a series of things. There were some sporting things, there were some walking things, and it was all social. Well, I'd call it social, but actually what it was the really important bonding stuff. And I just wonder, Claire, has anyone been thinking about that and saying, instead of just organising the next event as we used to, are they coming around to thinking, let's make it much more about the bonding and that interaction aspect? So they're asking you to think of things you can do during the day that will help people just build trust and work in teams.
I think a lot of the networks already were doing those kind of networking, bonding days, events, half days, whatever they are. However, I think that there's a lot more focus now on this. The clients that we're talking to for next year's events and beyond, we're thinking much less about, the amazing gala dinner in the most beautiful place. We're thinking much more about, okay, how can we actually get everybody together and keep everybody together and get strategy in there to help people meet, understand best practice, understand how everyone else is doing it well, past business, all of those kind of things. And, there's a lot of people actually that are thinking about, rather than going into a city, they're now starting to think about going into maybe the countryside, a little bit away from the sort of scary COVID situation. But there's nothing else out there. So everybody stays in one place for that short period of time and, really gets a lot of value out of the content, but also gets a lot of value out of the connection.
Very good. We're coming into land, and I'd like you all to get your crystal balls out now, and we're going to talk about the future for the accounting networks. Has the game changed for them irrevocably? What does this new normal look like? And William, I'll come to you first. We know for a fact that there'll be some kind of recession. We know that bills that have been deferred are going to become payable. We know that loans taken out are going to be kicked down the road, and then they're going to become payable. A vaccine's not in place anytime soon. We're not going to be shaking hands for a long time. So let's say you're running a network and you've got 150 firms in 150 countries, and you've got a £2-3 billion collective budget there under your firm. What's coming up for these networks? What do they need to change? What are they going to need to be doing?
Well, I think and it really goes back to something Paul said earlier. I think they need to it gives them an opportunity to get very close to their clients and get closer.
The member firms, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, to the member. Well, the member firms to get closer to their clients.
Right.
The networks to get closer to each other.
Yeah.
Go back to something Paul said earlier, asking about the development strategy, and there was one program for the last, couple of years, for a number of the networks, I wrote them a development curriculum for each of the member firms with a sort of behavioural development program that could be offered centrally. And I have to say, no interest whatsoever. It was all too difficult. Once lockdown came and we went to sort of virtual stuff, the interest has been off the plot. You know, everybody suddenly realizes that the centre's got to do something they've got to alter the value proposition for the member firms. And now the idea of offering a centrally delivered curriculum to which all of the member firms can sign up and be delivered virtually is much more attractive. Previously, the logistics of organising face-to-face training for member firms, and as Paul said earlier, typically, and as Claire said, typically only senior people going. Now, we've been delivering stuff for a client of ours in Italy, and they've given what was previously a sort of senior manager partner type program, they've given access to, excuse me.
Oh, the joys of live technology in Zoom meetings.
They've given access, they've given access, I should have switched it off. They've given access to all of the junior members of the firm. So where previously we'd run a face-to-face event for 12 people, we're now running a virtual event for 50 with 5 breakout rooms and 3 tutors.
Yeah.
So I think that's the opportunity there.
Yeah, and when we come back to Claire on that one in a moment, I'm sure she'll tell us that engagement in virtual events is much higher than the face-to-face. But Robert, what do you see as the future for accounting networks? Are they going to be doing much differently, or hoping this just all blows over as a bad dream?
Mm-hmm. Well, to look to the future, I've been looking to the past, and actually, if you look over the last 200 years, you look at the GDP per capita here in the UK, and you take a look at the major events, wars, recessions, pandemics, obviously, huge dip in terms of performance. But what's really interesting is immediately after each of those dips, the trajectory is steeper. And the reason why, I firmly believe, is because all those organizations, all of those businesses, all of the infrastructure, all of society that was operating in a certain way up to that inflection point suddenly has got to rethink. The ones that aren't fit for purpose don't survive. They don't survive through the recession. The ones that are created within the recession, and by the way, I think now is a brilliant time to start up a business, whether that's IBM or Apple or Uber or Disney, all these organizations were founded in recessions, unencumbered by the old practices that were happening prior to the recession. And the ones that change and recognize that they're in a new world and don't hanker back to how things were, the old conferences that we used to go to, won't it be great when we can do that all over again? Those are the ones that are going to be part of the rebirth, the growth, the increased trajectory in terms of economic performance. So for goodness sakes, do not hanker back to what the world was like prior to the lockdown. Think about what the world is going to be like after it. And for networks, that's really encouraging their members not to think about compliance. Accountancy practices have survived off compliance for dare I say, decades now. They've got to look to advisory. Compliance just should be just coming through in the wash. That should all be automated. It's going to be robots and software and so on that's going to be delivering that stuff. Yeah. But actually gaining the insights from that, from the outputs from that compliance, enables practices to go out there and really advise and be the trusted advisor at a point in time when that's really needed.
Sure. Claire, you've been holding the hands of accounting networks and associations for a long time now. What does the future look like for them from your perspective?
Yeah, brave new world, definitely. I think, well, obviously I speak more from a conference perspective, but I think we're going to see the live conferences changing quite a lot. I think they're going to become more valuable in terms of what they're actually delivering. And I think we are going to see, as I say, that going to hybrid so that we get that extra sort of reach into the member firms. I'd like to say, I think it actually has a lot of value in terms of the whole climate change debate as well. We don't actually have to get on planes all the time. And I was speaking to one of our network clients recently who is really looking at how they can roll out a virtual program of events through all of their training, their learning and development, and then how they can integrate that into slightly larger events and then on into the big kind of regionals and global events. So I think companies that are thinking about this in terms of a long-term strategy is a really sensible way to go, and how that can be woven through the fabric of what they're doing in order to deliver things more effectively.
Sure. James Hickey, you've either been writing your shopping list there, or you've been ardently writing copious notes.
It's my memoir, my continued memoir, 20 years in networks, what I've learned. Look, I think that there are a couple of points. I think number one, networks are going to have potentially some serious cash flow issues coming up. A lot of them are, their revenue comes from banding firms by their turnover, and so their members are going to possibly struggle, because I think a lot of accounting firms are not necessarily good busy, they're bad busy at the moment. And I think a lot of networks are not necessarily good busy, they're bad busy. I think that looking at the conferences, and we spent a bit of time on this, I think that the face-to-face will come back, and I think it will come back fairly soon. It will start at a very local level, and I think it's needed, but for the right reasons. I think for far too long, networks have just had them. It's a very cyclical thing. Every March will be here, every May will be here, whatever. I think there needs to be a clear differential between online, offline learning. And I think a little bit like working from home now is the rabbit's out of the hat, and people realize the world still revolves when people work from home. Similarly, networks can still survive if they then really look, and Claire's already mentioned, to have a real strategy in terms of what's done online and what's done face-to-face. If it can be done online, do it there. Don't do it face-to-face. And the face-to-face will be much greater value. And maybe bringing inspirational speakers in, that you need to be there, because yes, there is a lot you can do online, but there's particularly on that relationship that you do need to meet people, and I think it will come back. And I would encourage firms to really look at it. And I think the biggest opportunity, but also the biggest challenge for networks, is their ability to change and be agile in a marketplace that is just changing faster than ever before. Forget technology, forget all of it. In a world where there are really too many unknowns at the moment, and we're dealing with people who like to know what the hell's going on, it's managing that process and being able to be, to take ownership of that journey, not always wait for Boris or whoever else to say you can now do this. But there's a lot that businesses, networks, and accounting firms can just take on their own initiative and look at, we can work out what this world is going to look like. We'll make the effort to do this, and it will be supported by then the various stages of reducing lockdown, maybe bringing lockdown back in. And it's having that stability, and most importantly, it's taking their teams on this journey. And being true leaders, supporting them, and having empathy with this journey, that people really need to be. They're not looking for all the answers, but they just want people. They want leaders who can just say, "Look, this is what we believe is right at the moment. We want you to come with us, and we'll support you on that journey."
Yeah. Paul Richmond, looking very thoughtful there, like you've got some really profound things to say. We talk about M&A and a lot of movement within the professional services firms. Is there going to be a shake-up with the accounting networks and associations? Paul, what do you feel is coming up for them?
Gosh, M&A.
I've kind of led you down the path there, and you were perhaps going to...
Yeah, I was ready to sort of follow up with James there, but we kind of gone off.
Hold that thought. But what does the future look like for the networks and associations in supporting the profession?
I think what this has done, this whole pandemic, it's people are saying, where am I getting value? Mm-hmm. So if I am a client, I'm looking to my advisor and going, do you know what? I think a lot of advisors will be phoning up and being in touch with their clients all the time, which is fantastic. And I heard someone say the other day, the challenge is going to be when those clients, when the pandemic eases, lockdown eases, and the clients are going, is this phone still on? Because my advisor hasn't rung me. I'm not being shown the same love now lockdown's eased that I was getting during lockdown.
Yeah, we're here for you in lockdown.
Exactly. And I think the same thing applies for the networks, because the networks now are worried about, what does membership mean if we're not bringing people together? We need to show them some love. And I think James is right in that everyone is going to be saying, well, where am I getting greatest value? And clients are probably going to say, I don't get great value, as Robert says, from my traditional accounting services, all the, the standard sort of stuff we get, the compliance work. I get the value from that phone call, from the cup of coffee. I get the value from the talking to me about family and work. In the same way, the networks are going to be looking and saying, where am I getting greatest value? And I think there may be a few firms saying, well, I've been a member of this network, which is kind of going back to the same old. But this network, which is courting me virtually, digitally, is now saying, if I join them, well, I get some of William's, online learning, bite-sized learning. I've got career progression, which we can do. I've got all my additional compliance services on there. Yeah. So I think that the networks may see a lot of competition in the future for members.
We will see. I'm going to ask you all for closing remarks. We've got 5 minutes on the clock, so kind of a minute each, just to summarize your thoughts. And William, I'm going to come to you first. I'm just teeing you up there, but we've talked about the importance of staying relevant for these networks and providing value to their member firms, because we know that in Q4, subscription fees are going to become due. And accounting firms are going to say, is it worth us being a member of this network? What does 2021 look like for us? And by all accounts, 2021 might be an even tougher year than 2020. So what advice would you give to the leaders of accounting networks, associations, alliances all over the world for them to compete and grow, recover, and provide relevance for the next 12, 24 months? William, you first.
I think it's a good question. I think we've covered most of it. I think that historically, and remember, I've come to the accounting networks late and only via conferences, but it looked to me a bit like an old boys club, where you paid your membership and you went to the club events 2 times a year in glamorous places, and went for purely social reasons. I think now is the opportunity, and actually some of the networks have already embraced this, where they are going to have to provide something more than the old boys club.
Yeah.
So they're providing much more stuff centrally, particularly development, education, learning, networking. They're taking a much more active role than they were before, just as James has said. So I think that's the future. They're going to have to be much more proactive and much more engaged with the members, and not just not react to providing a nice social environment.
Very good. Robert, closing thoughts from you. What advice would you give to the leaders of accounting networks watching and listening?
Yeah, so I'll keep it really brief. I think right now accountancy practices and their clients are hurting. Things are tough out there, and accountancy practices and their leaders are looking for help, support, and advice. And where should they look to? They should look to their membership organizations. Those membership organizations have got to get off the fence. They've absolutely got to identify and showcase best practice, whether it's within their network or outside of it. And yes, absolutely, that's technology, but it's every aspect of what the practice of the future will look like. And if the membership organization isn't making those recommendations, isn't showcasing that best practice, then what the hell are they there for?
Oh, there was no sitting on the fence there, Robert, was there?
Never is from me, Rob, you know that.
Right between the eyes, love that. Claire, what advice would you give to the leaders of accounting networks watching and listening right now for them to cope with what's coming at them?
Well, I think that the whole element of community that is part of the networks is just so important. I know that we're talking about how to make that more relevant, how to make it more valid, but that doesn't go away, and building relationships, building trust, all of those things are just absolutely critical. So I think in this brave new world, I think we need to be working with our clients to find a way to deliver this in a more relevant way. And I think, we are going to have to think about how to make that cost effective. Virtual conferencing obviously is a big answer to that. But I think it's thinking how to do this in a different way so that we give value and worthwhile membership to the network members.
Yeah, because without the members, the networks are nothing, are they?
Exactly.
Yeah. Paul Richmond, are we looking at good times for leaders of accounting networks? What advice would you give to them?
I think it depends on your perspective if it's a good time. Somebody said earlier, you know, actually it's a great time after any pandemic. I think it was Robert. You know, this is
never waste a good crisis, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to grasp that nettle and say, actually, now's the time to change, because everyone has said, oh, we've achieved in 5 weeks what would have taken 5 years.
Yeah,
I think it's absolutely right. You need to do two things as a leader in a network. One is empathise with your membership, understand their pain, and help solve their problems. And I think the other is be that advisory service for best practice. And that also means you need to help people future-proof their own firm by giving them really good, sound technical advice. And that includes, all the sort of online services that are out there, and also behavioral stuff. So you can help them with behavioral development. And I think in terms of eventing and bringing the network together and what value do people get, it will move away from being an opportunity to go and have a jolly, because people will probably do that in their local environment, and it will become more, how can we as a network really build collaborative teams amongst our membership? I think that's the leadership challenge.
Yeah. And James Hickey, we finished with you. You've been living this world for the last 20 years, and you've been at the cutting edge of this. So now that you've been benched and we've taken you out of the game for just a short time, what advice would you give to the leaders of accounting networks to finish off?
Well, I think my first throwaway line is I don't think there's ever been a better time to be in a leadership role within a professional service firm or a network. The key lesson is don't look backwards. So, if you've got 20 years, 30 years history, that's great. But it's the next 12 to 18 months that will really define the business and will whether it's be the last chapter or the next chapter on the journey ahead. And I think that there is immense opportunity out there. I think what I would be suggesting is, and there might be some ruffling some feathers on this call, is actually a complete change and pivot to a less complicated world. I think networks and associations are all too good at making things complicated and almost feeling as though they've got to throw product, they've got to throw offering at their members. It's not the case. Yeah. And I think that actually there is an opportunity for a leaner, tighter organization that's commercially run to really drive some value. And so it'll be interesting to see. I go back to your question. I think there are going to be M&As within the sector. I think there are a number of distressed networks and associations already out there. I think you're going to see large firms coming in and possibly buying or taking over some networks. So I think the landscape is going to change. I think it's really exciting, and there's so much opportunity, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, thank you very much. I always remember Jack Welch, ex-GE, saying, any idiot can make something more complex. Tell it to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
20 years of being an idiot. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everyone. That's been a superb panel discussion today. We really appreciate your insights, your contribution, your laughter, your candor in sharing what you feel is coming up. You all have a unique perspective on the accounting profession, the landscape. So, and I'll leave you with these words. They say that this is not going to be a reboot, but a reset. So a reboot is when you turn your computer off, you turn it back on, and it's exactly the same as it was before. But we've got a reset here where you turn your computer off, you turn it back on, and it looks completely different. And there is no going back to how it was before, however you define that. And you've all recognized that, as Claire called it, the brave new world, the new normal, however you term it. These are fascinating, interesting, crazy times. And with people like you speaking into these accounting networks, there is hope for them to in turn play their part and serve the accounting firms that will in turn serve the businesses that are going to keep the whole economy going. So thank you so much. I'm going to keep the Zoom room open for a few more minutes if you want to network, because apparently that's quite popular. And if you do have a Zoom call to go on at the top of the hour, we totally get that too. Can I just ask you to just pose for me with a lovely, nice smile and pretend that you enjoyed this? And I'm going to do a little screenshot here. Where is my screenshot thing gone? You know, the wonders of screenshots. Yeah, give me a quick smile. That's print screen. Goodness me, where's my... There we go. There we go. Thank you, everybody. You are free to go, free to stay. I'm going to stop the recording right